Thank you.
Good evening, doctors. I'm Dr. Akshay Nabar, medical advisor with CIPLA Urology, and I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to this much-awaited panel discussion on a hot topic of today, telemedicine. The issue of access to healthcare is a universal one, though the degree of the need may differ. The underlying factors of mobility of patients, deficient specialist doctor to population ratio, unfavorable geography, unfavorable weather, cost of travel are common to most developed as well as the least developed countries. This applies even to the field of urology, urologists and their patients. Fortunately today we are blessed with the boon of high-end technology, which barring physical contact can help bridge most barriers of distance between urologists and their patients, allowing even monetary transactions to take place. Today, we have a very distinguished panel to discuss this issue, which addresses the burning need of today as well as that of years to come. It is indeed my pleasure to introduce our today's moderator, Dr. Sunil Shroff. Dr. Shroff is a senior consultant urologist and transplant surgeon based out of Chennai, where he practices at the Madras Medical Mission Hospital. Having undergone his graduate and postgraduate surgical training in India, he specialized in urology from the UK, where he also practiced as a teacher and clinician for over a decade. He was professor and head of the Department of Urology at the esteemed Sri Ramachandra Medical College and Research Institute at Chennai, where he mentored several MCH students and was actively involved as an office bearer in several urology bodies. He has over 100 research publications and papers to his credit. He is now devoted to the cause of promoting organ donation and digital health in India. I would now request Dr. Shroff sir to kindly take over as moderator of the webcast and begin by introducing our distinguished panelists. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Akshay. Get my full screen. Yeah. Are you able to see me? Yes. So good evening to all of you, and welcome to our webinar. We are going to spend the next 2 hours on the best practices for urology and how to use telemedicine, the do's, the don'ts, and how to do it. And we have an excellent panel of speakers. We have Professor Ganapathy, who is a neurosurgeon and considered the father of telemedicine in India. He has been at telemedicine for the last, I think, 24 years, as long as I've known him. He's also helped me in organ donation. I remember the first brain death declaration where he helped us in making it happen. So very great privilege to have him among us. He's held many, many posts in the past, including being the president of Telemedicine Society of India, the Urological Society, surgeons, and so on. I can go on for the whole hour if you and Professor Ganapathy. So he's going to give us an overview of how we come so far in India with telemedicine. And then we have Magmishika. Magmishika is a senior associate lawyer with TMT practice in Delhi. And she, to some extent, has been greatly responsible for getting the telemedicine guidelines in this country. So she will speak to us about the legal aspects of telemedicine. And then I will give you an overview of how we can use it in urology practice and build around her presentation and talk about the clinical applications of the telemedicine guidelines. After that, we have Dr. Subramaniam Swaminathan. He's from Chennai. Currently, you may have seen him on many television channels. He's not as old as his hair look, he's fairly young. And he is going to give us a kind of an overview of a triage in urology on, what we can do in this COVID-19 times, because I think COVID-19 is here to stay for many more months. It's unlikely to go away in a hurry. Even after the lockdown is lifted, many of us are going to have challenges. So we felt it is very appropriate to have somebody like him to speak to us on very practical aspects of how we as urologists, when we do our clinics, when we do our operations, what care we need to take and so on. So he's going to give us some kind of teletriage to us. And towards the end, we have another fine speaker, very experienced computer technocrat, who is responsible for 2 platforms. One platform is called Curify, it's an online platform for teleconsults. And he also has a platform called WeClinic. And he's going to tell us how a urologist should set up a telemedicine practice, starting from word go, how to set it up without an app on their own, how to get a payment gateway, how to put a digital signature in place. So he's going to tell you about the practical aspects. Now after that, we'll have Q&A. So this is how this whole 2 hours are going to run. We are hoping to finish all our talks within an hour or just a little bit over an hour. It is 6:09 now we are starting. And by, I think, 7:10, our talk should be over. And then we'll have 1 hour of question answers. If there are many questions coming in, then we'll extend the time by another half an hour. But we hope that you start keying in your questions as the speaker is speaking, so that I, as a moderator, have an idea of the questions. And if there are many questions, we'll try and collate those questions together and give one answer. So this is how we go. So thank you very much, Akshay. And I would request Professor Ganapathy, our first speaker, to give us an overview of how we have come so far with telemedicine in India. What has given us the momentum? What has given us the drive? So here you are, Professor Ganapathy. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. Dr. Shroff has given me 600 seconds in which I am supposed to condense 24 years of involvement in telemedicine. Obviously, an impossible task. Nevertheless, I will try. I was introduced to the word telemedicine, I so vividly remember, on September 16th, 1996, when I was delivering an institute lecture at Kanpur at the Indian Institute of Technology. Professor Srivatsan, the then HOD, EEE, was so convincing that then from that day commenced a love affair which over the last 24 years has taken its toll. My first wife is often relegated as number 3. Initially, I was wedded to neurosurgery, but then over the last couple of years, particularly, I've divorced neurosurgery, and now it's telehealth, telehealth, telehealth all the way. Looking back, the journey has been exciting, arduous at times, often frustrating. Sniggers were common. Comments include telemedicine, ha ha ha. But then that was the 20th century. I wonder where I had the audacity to send a letter to the Secretary of the Association of Rural Surgeons of India as early as 1998 and requested them to adopt telemedicine. They were equally interested, but unfortunately we were not able to develop a business model, and so it died a natural death. The formal birth of telemedicine in India was on March 24, 2000, when Bill Clinton, the then President of the United States, formally commissioned the world's first VSAT-enabled village hospital in Aragonda. It is extremely difficult for people in 2020 to even think of how the world was as recently as 20 years ago. Technology has been doubling in the last couple of years, and I sometimes feel it was the Jurassic Park or the Paleolithic age even just 20 years ago. From that day, we never looked backwards, though of course it was extremely difficult. I remember in 2001, June 19th, and Bill Gates was one of the speakers. Of course, he spoke and went away. Obviously, he didn't listen to my talk. But then we held the first intercontinental, excepting Antarctica, every other continent was represented, a live multi-point telemedicine symposium. I mean, today it looks ridiculous even talking about it. My grandson uses his smartphone and he has a meeting with several of his cousins from different continents of the world. Believe me, in 2000 there was something spectacular, and I remember saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, ladies and gentlemen, because that was the time zones which we addressed. A year later, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, the then chairman of ISRO, came to Apollo Main Hospital, and even today ISRO publicly acknowledges it was that day which made ISRO decide to take up telemedicine in a big way. We did Apollo Shah telemedicine connection, For the first time in the history of South Asia, we used a satellite INSAT 3AC, if I remember right. I demonstrated a patient with neurocysticercosis who was in the Shah Hospital, and Prem Shekhar, a pediatric cardiologist, showed how an echo could actually be transmitted through satellite, and he was also able to auscultate the patient. After that, I had the unique opportunity, probably the only neurosurgeon in the world, who addressed 350 principals of engineering colleges at Anna University. The then Vice Chancellor told me, would you like to talk to them? I said, yes, sir, of course. And I tried to convince the engineering college principals that they could do much more than the medical colleges in India. I at least was convinced for the simple reason 80% of Tamil Nadu's engineering colleges are in suburban and rural Tamil Nadu, and every one of them obviously has a computer science department, triple E and whatnot. Unfortunately or fortunately, only 5 of the principals agreed. We set it up, but again, for lack of a business model, it died a natural death. I mean, it looks so silly today, but believe me, in 2001 and 2002, even holding a teleconference with the Department of Neurosurgery, Fujita University, Japan, with New Jersey and so on, Saudi Arabia, all my friends in neurosurgery in different parts of the world, I got them together. We did a tele-neurosurgery conference. Selva Kumar of Ramchandra Medical College also did it from SRMC. We even got the Consul General of the United States of America to come to Apollo Mine Hospital to inaugurate it. Such was the excitement in those days. This is a slide which I always refresh myself how we really fought. Ericsson got special permission from the Ministry of Telecommunications. 3G had not become commercially effective then. They got a spectrum for 6 months exclusively for research purposes, and I was actively involved with them. And we hired a Kalyana Mandapam in the outskirts of Madurai. We did an ultrasound scan, of course, used a stethoscope, etc., and transmitted all the images through wireless. This was the very first time. It was not even 3G. It was what we called edge in those days, echo through edge, etc. I thought I was pretty smart, and I had made all arrangements. I even spoke to the assistant engineer in Madurai division, telling him that please ensure that we have electricity. We have got 120 volunteers lined up. It was a mega job in those days. Unfortunately, I did not factor in that the assistant engineer's mother-in-law would die, and all the staff of the assistant engineer went away there. So what happened? The diesel which I had got, extra diesel which I had got, was just not enough. But I was not a person willing to give up, and I managed to take photographs of this also. You can see on the top right-hand corner how we removed diesel from the ambulance van and from the other vans which we had brought. We removed the diesel from that, used it to work the generator till such time as we were able to get diesel again after a period of 4 hours. Never say die, never take no for an answer. We wanted to do what we had set our minds to do, and that was the only thing which stood in front of us. 2002, this is a letter which I cherish, written by then GOC in C, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka area, who later became the Adjutant General of the Indian Army. And with his help, I set up telemedicine centers, not only in the Andhra, Tamil Nadu area, but later on, when he became a Lieutenant General, in Central Command as well. And I literally threw it up as a challenge to him. He took up the challenge, and 18 centers were put up all over the army. Unfortunately, and this is a lesson I learned the very hard way, telemedicine in those years depended on an individual. We had not yet built up a system. There was no SOP as such. And when General Jamwal retired from service 3 years later, he died a natural death, and all the 18 units set up between 2002 and 2003 became non-functional until about 2 years ago when they were revived. Again in 2003, I was invited to give a talk on the role of telemedicine in critical care. My father fell ill, and obviously I couldn't leave him. So suddenly I got an idea. I said, why? Doesn't matter if I'm not able to go to Jaipur. Let me go to Apollo Main Hospital. We put heaven and earth together. We put everything possible. And I was able to give a 25-minute talk from the bedside of the ICU. I demonstrated how an echocardiogram can be transmitted, how a ventilator settings can be seen remotely, and so on. And believe me, this lecture had a much better effect than if I had gone there physically. You can see the date, February 2003. Then followed a series of visits not only over India, but many centers in the world. I had an opportunity to go to many centers, Kosovo, Balkan Seminar of Telemedicine, and all these places I was literally representing India because nobody else from India at that time was interested. And that was how I was an evangelist par excellence. We put Indian telemedicine on the world map at that time. We also had visitors. We had the President of Nigeria who came to us virtually. The Prime Minister of Mauritius physically came. We had several ministers and heads of states from various countries who came to Apollo Hospitals, Chennai. Some of them went to Delhi, and every one of them we demonstrated. I particularly remember the First Lady of Uganda, who, like Hillary Clinton, was a senator in her own right and a minister. She made a call. I had made a presentation to her from Madras. She made a call and then said, her secretary called me and then said, the First Lady wants to see you day after tomorrow. I thought maybe she's coming to Madras or Delhi. And then I got the shock of my life when they said, yes, the appointment has been fixed at 10, come to Kampala. I mean, this was how telemedicine was practiced in those days. Of course, Dr. Pratap Reddy said, you take your decision, whatever you want, we will support you. I did go to Kampala, met everybody, made a proposal, but by the time the government itself got changed. 2009, we were actively...
9 minutes are up.
Yeah, the 2009, we were actively involved with the Pan-African Network project, and here you can see the body language speaks for itself. You can see how people from Lagos, Mauritius, Seychelles, etc. were eagerly listening to a lecture. It is a paradox that while we were being recognized by very big institutions outside the country, honestly, there was hardly any recognition, whether in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, or India. Columbia University, one of the best universities in the world, selected us. They sent a team of people here, and the work done by ATNF is still being used as global best practices for their master's degree in international relations. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have South Asia's largest 24/7 medical response center in Hyderabad. As you can see here, more than 130 people can be there. What started as a hobby, a neurosurgeon who started telemedicine as a hobby in 1998, slowly the involvement became more and more. 4 years ago, I took a decision. It was either neurosurgery or telemedicine. Telemedicine was expanding so much, and I honestly felt that I could contribute more to telemedicine than neurosurgery. So I have stopped my neurosurgical practice as such, and I'm fully involved in telemedicine. I'm absolutely privileged to have a wonderful team of people. Today we do almost, this was an older slide, today we do almost 6,000 teleconsultations per day, and we have reached the 10 million mark, mostly through public-private partnership. It is my dream. In my lifetime, I wish to see, ISRO has already announced, and COVID-19 notwithstanding, I'm sure that in 2021, there will be an opportunity to monitor healthcare in outer space, 420 kilometers above the earth. That will be the height of telemedicine, and from very humble beginnings, we do hope that we will also have an opportunity to help contribute to monitoring healthcare for India's first monarchs. As a commencement, I even brought out a special edition on extraterrestrial neurosciences. Most of these articles have been downloaded several thousand times, and this is also progressing well. So it would take me much longer if I say everything, but what is my take-home message? My take-home message would be, yes, it has been the next generation. I'm slowly reaching the emeritus category. The next generation are wonderful people, and they have the passion. At the end of the day, vitamin M will always appear, will always come. Please do not look at ROI as your first or as your second purpose for telemedicine. Believe me, it will come, it will happen. I was the only loss-making department for the first 15 years in the Apollo system, but the bosses had full confidence that one day we would strike even. Today we have struck even, and again, thanks to the coronavirus, I'm sure telehealth in India is going to be a commercially viable entity. Thank you once again for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Ganapathy. for an excellent overview of how we've come so far. It is said that if you want, the mantra for success in life is to convert your hobby into a profession. And you said it started as a hobby, and now it is becoming so much more accepted. And we are living your dream, and I'm sure that mission to Mars will happen, or mission to Moon rather, or mission to the space from India. And I'm sure when the first astronaut from India goes into space, you'll be there again to be able to help with monitoring of the astronaut. Wonderful, Professor Ganapathy. 10 million consultations, amazing. So thank you again. And with this, I would also invite now, of course, our senior associate from TMT Law Firm, who's been responsible for putting the practice guidelines in place with the Medical Council Board of Governors, in super session of Board of Governors, MCI rather. So Bhagmishika, you're going to give us an overview of the legality of the practice guidelines.
We completely take the phone out.
The next 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shroff. Thank you, Dr. Ganapathy, for setting out the context in which telemedicine has grown in the country and how it has become so pervasive that the need to regulate it specifically and to provide guidance in terms of the law became very essential. Having worked with the Telemedicine Society for quite some time now, we felt that there was the need to have a structured law which could lend some guidance or throw some light as to how the two most important stakeholders in the ecosystem, that is the registered medical practitioner and the patients, are supposed to behave, or how are they supposed to interact in the environment of telemedicine. At the outset, I would like to begin by impressing upon each one of you the fact that these guidelines have come by way of enabling you to work in this ecosystem or to exist in this ecosystem in a safe and secure environment. These guidelines are not to be looked at or to be treated as a substitute to the laws which already existed and you were required to comply with in the traditional setup. Having said that, during the course of this discussion, I will be walking you through the scope and applicability of the telemedicine practice guidelines. I will be briefly explaining the interactions that have been envisaged within the scope of these guidelines, how the RMP or the registered medical practitioner is supposed to behave, and the norms and protocols that they are supposed to adhere to within these guidelines, and then the manner in which prescriptions are supposed to be dispensed with, and will finally be signing off from this particular discourse by understanding the duties and responsibilities of the registered medical practitioners. Since I've already mentioned that the guidelines have tried to identify all the stakeholders who participate in this ecosystem, the two most important stakeholders are the registered medical practitioners and the patient. The guidelines give equal focus to both, and they have tried to identify or define the registered medical practitioners as persons enrolled with the state medical register or the national register as per the Indian Medical Council Act of 1956. Having said that, what is important to understand and what I will reiterate is that while telemedicine was always legal, with the incidence of these guidelines, it has now become all the more convenient for you as an RMP to indulge in intrastate practice across the borders with patients from across the state borders or across the union territory borders. It is now very much possible for you to do this without having to again re-register yourself with that particular state where you move your domicile to. Also, what has been categorically stated within the guidelines is that now, much like before, you are also allowed to, or probably you are, it has been acknowledged that you can charge consultation fees for telemedicine consults as you do in your traditional setups. Now, while the guidelines have provided guidance for certain interactions or certain manners in which you are supposed to dispense with prescription, what the guidelines do not discuss or do not provide any helping hand or guidance for are these specific exclusions, which you will find have been set out within the initial few pages of the telemedicine practice guidelines. Now, you have to understand, since telemedicine happens in an environment which requires interactions against IT systems and there is involvement of hardware and software tools, it is also opening itself up to be the subject to IT laws and other data privacy and protection laws. Giving due regard to such fact, the guidelines do not actually provide any guidance as to how you are supposed to adhere to or to adopt to specifications for hardware and softwares, or for that matter, how you as an RMP are supposed to interact with any data management systems that you might to onboard for your own telemedicine practice. Also, because telemedicine practice guidelines have recently come out and we are still testing these guidelines, the guidelines do not provide any guidance as to what happens should you indulge in surgical or invasive surgeries that can be performed remotely. So the guidelines do not provide you any handholding as to what happens should you decide to indulge in such a practice. Also, what the guidelines do not talk about is the purpose, is the use case of research and evaluation. So should you be using telemedicine consults for the definite use cases of research and evaluation only, the guidelines do not explain what happens in such a scenario. For each one of us, what is important to bear in mind is that in view of everything that we have discussed so far, and in view of the fact that laws vary from country to country, and not only because of the domain that we are talking about, but also because of the nature or the socio-economic conditions of that country, what has happened is the guidelines also do not speak about the scenario where you as an RMP decide to engage with a patient who is residing outside the territorial jurisdiction of the country. So if you look at these specific exclusions, you will not be able to find any guidance as to what happens if you decide to engage in any of these exclusions. So please be wary of the fact that since they have been specifically excluded within the guidelines, you cannot rely on the guidelines to seek any guidance or any handholding should you indulge in such a practice. Now, the guidelines have also recognized certain relationships or certain interactions that come to play in the environment of telemedicine. If you see, there are 4 categories which have been identified within the scope of these guidelines, namely the mode of communication, transmission of information, purpose of consultation, and relationships. All of this play an important role in understanding how an RMP is supposed to engage in a telemedicine consult with the patient, how the RMP is supposed to seek consent of the patient, and finally how to sign off or conclude with a telemedicine consult by dispensation of a prescription over a telemedicine consult. Mode of communication features within itself the 3 modes which can be entered into for a telemedicine consult by the RMP or the patient. That is audio consultation, where it is pure dependency on only audio calls. Video consultation, where you have the capabilities of interchange of audio and visual images. And then finally text-based communication, which can be over emails, instant messaging tools, and other messaging apps. Transmission of information becomes important because guidelines have also acknowledged the fact that certain times the interaction taking place between the RMP and the patient is not happening in a real-time basis. It could be happening in a store and forward model. So in that sense, to be able to distinguish between the two, real-time conversations or real-time consults have been classified as synchronous modes of communication and non-real-time based communication, where there is a disjoint or where there is a distinction between the time where the RMP is actually looking at the information or where the patient has initiated a conversation. Non-real-time consults have been classified under the asynchronous transmission of information. Purpose of consultation has been separately put under a separate bracket, and we will be discussing non-emergency consult later through the course of this discussion. First, I will be dealing with emergency consult. Emergency consult, for an RMP to proceed with an emergency consult, it is essential that the RMP is convinced of the fact that there is no alternative means of care, alternative means of in-person care that is available to the patient. Only in that scenario should an RMP indulge in an emergency consult over telemedicine. And the RMP will be able to give only first aid information, life-saving measures, and has to sign off by making an in-person referral. So either you make a referral for the patient to go to a nearest clinical or medical establishment, or you conclude it by saying that the telemedicine consult, because it's an emergency consult, comes to an end and the patient must go to an emergency division of a hospital. It is essential that you adhere to all these restrictions when it comes to emergency consults. Also equally important is to understand the relationship that an RMP is expected to share with the other stakeholders in the ecosystem. Since we are already aware of the fact that it's not always the patient who is interacting directly with the RMP, or otherwise the ecosystem or the guidelines have specifically acknowledged all the kinds of interactions or relationships that can be built over a telemedicine consult, and then specifically provides for what happens in case the RMP is directly interacting with the patient, as opposed to when an RMP is actually interacting with a caregiver who could be a family member, a friend, a relative, or a colleague of the patient, and what happens when an RMP is engaging with another RMP for a referral or is speaking to the other RMP for the purposes of understanding the nuances of that particular case better. Also, it is important for an RMP to be able to establish a valid relationship with a health worker because of the prevalent scenario or the socio-economic conditions of this country, and also because of outreach into the rural area and because of the incidence of the health and wellness centers. Since there are health workers sitting at such centers and they are the ones who actually interact with the RMP, it becomes essential for the RMP to be able to get into that particular relationship and to be able to engage in a fruitful telemedicine consult. All of these categories play an important role in understanding how an RMP is supposed to behave whenever they are presented with any of such interactions. What is important for the RMP to remember is that while the practice guidelines have actually provided for these factors which must be accounted for by an RMP while they are engaging in a telemedicine consult, it is imperative and it is of paramount importance that the RMP is aware that it is their professional judgment which must prevail at all times. So while the context in which the patient has presented himself or herself is available to the RMP and the identification is sufficient for the RMP to move with the telemedicine consult, there is an appropriate mode of communication, there is consent of the patient flowing for the particular telemedicine consult, and then you have also evaluated satisfactorily that the type of consult is either non-emergency or emergency, and only when you have satisfied these factors and you are able to use your own professional judgment should you proceed with evaluating the patient and finally managing the patient or disengaging from a particular telemedicine consult. We will be dealing with each of these factors separately and disjointly immediately. The first factor becomes important for each of the RMPs to consider is because the context in which the patient is presenting himself or herself should be abundantly clear to the RMP. An RMP should be able to look at the patient and sufficiently ascertain the health condition of the patient before they even decide to continue with the telemedicine consult. It plays an important role because unless and until the RMP is able to engage in a fruitful conversation or a coherent conversation, it will become very difficult for the RMP to even be able to ascertain the complaints that the patient is actually suffering from. For simple understanding, if you feel as an RMP that the patient has presented himself or herself under substance abuse or is under intoxication, since you will not be able to even engage in a fruitful conversation, you have the discretion to disengage from such a telemedicine consult. Equally important, and actually because of all of this is happening in an online environment or where there is a disjoint between the patient and the RMP, it is essential that the identification of the patient flows well to the RMP and vice versa. So while as an RMP it is incumbent upon you to take the demographic details of the patient, should you feel that there is a certain element of suspicion on your part or you think that there is a disjoint or a disconnect, you are well within your rights to seek identification proof of the patient, and in case of a minor, you also have the right to seek the identification proof of the accompanying adult or the guardian who has come along with the minor or who is at the other end with the minor. It is important for you to be able to collect that information so that you can establish a valid relationship between the accompanying adult and the guardian and the minor patient. Equally important, it is for the patient to be able to build the relationship of trust with you as an RMP. And so, it is also essential that you ensure that in all the correspondence that is generating from your end and is flowing towards the patient in form of a prescription, in form of a general email, or an instant messaging chat, or should you charge a consultation fee where you are generating an invoice, it is essential that all such correspondence carry your registration details. This is an important element for you to consider. Also, as an RMP, you enjoy the discretion of choosing if the mode of communication that you have decided to engage in a telemedicine consult with the patient is sufficient or not. Should you think that the audio consult is not sufficient for a particular interaction, you can actually request the patient to move from an audio consult to a video consult. The liberty or the discretion is given to you because, again, while you have to consider all these factors, if your professional judgment says that a certain mode of communication is better than the other, then you must go ahead and exercise your right to switch to that mode of communication. Now, since we have discussed the type of consultation, under non-emergency consult, there are two further distinctions. One is the first-time consult and the second is follow-up consultation. If we look at the first chart, in case of a first-time consult, or what qualifies as a first-time consult is when a patient goes to an RMP for a consultation for the very first time, or a patient is going to an RMP for a consult, to the same RMP for a consult, but goes after an expiry of 6 months from the date of earlier consult. If a time lapse of 6 months has happened, then in that case also the second consult will be treated as a first time consult. What is important for you to notice, even if the patient is coming back to you as a treating RMP, who was the treating RMP in the first time round also, but the patient is coming back to you with a different health condition, remember that you are the same RMP, it's the same patient, and the time lapse of 6 months have not passed. However, if there is a different health condition or where there are new symptoms which were not in the spectrum in the earlier health condition, then that second consult will also qualify as a first time consult. And also, and very important factor for each one of you to familiarize yourselves with is that if you as an RMP are not able to recall the context in which the patient had presented himself or herself in the earlier consult, or where you are not able to recall the context of the earlier treatment or advice, then that will also qualify as a first time consult. Please do not treat it as a follow-up consultation, because as opposed to what we have understood about first time consultation, in case of follow-up consultation, where the patient goes to the same RMP within 6 months from the earlier in-person consultation, it becomes a follow-up consultation. And it has to be tied in with the factor. You see this plus sign is to ensure or to reinforce that this qualifier has to tie in with the factor that it is continuation of care and for the same health condition. Because if it's not the case, then it will go back to being qualified as a first time consult. So please be wary of these two distinctions and be mindful of this, because this will play an important role for you to be able to judge what you can prescribe to the patient. When you have factored in all those factors or conditions that we have discussed so far, what is also essential for you to notice that since it's happening in an IT environment, since it's happening in an online environment, and there's flow of sensitive personal information from the patient's end, it is essential that you actually capture the consent of the patient before you even proceed with a particular telemedicine consult. The guidelines have stated that where a patient is the one who is triggering a particular telemedicine consult, in that sense, it can be said that implied consent is flowing from the patient's end. However, whenever a call is initiated by an RMP, a health worker, or a caregiver, or wherever there is involvement of any of these other stakeholders, it is essential, it is incumbent on you as an RMP to explain the scenario to the patient and then take their explicit consent, and then also preserve records of such consent at your own end. Please be mindful of this. When you have satisfied all these factors that we have discussed so far, you have ensured that you have understood the context, the type of consultation, the mode of communication, you have picked up the identification, and you have also taken consent of the patient. And when you are able to use your own professional judgment to come to a point where you believe that you have sufficient medical information about the patient, it's only then that you must decide to proceed with health education, counseling, or prescription of medicines. Remember that you have to ensure that records of all this conversation, records of keeping consent, records of logbook entry, all has to be maintained. And records of evaluation and patient management also has to be maintained by you as an RMP. What you have to also be mindful is of the fact that any prescription which you generate without appropriate diagnosis or provisional diagnosis will amount to professional misconduct on your part. I will not spend much time in explaining how you are supposed to dispense with a prescription, but I will be highlighting that a template has been provided as an annexure to these guidelines, and I request each one of you to go back and read the guidelines and see that you ensure that if you're not able to replicate that exact template, you ensure that you pick up all those placeholders, put it in your prescription pad, and only once you are clear as to the lists that have been provided within the guidelines, and then you have applied your professional judgment, and you think that you can fall back on any of these lists to actually prescribe medicines, should you try to create a prescription and share it with the patient. What is important for you to remember is that all these lists have been specifically provided and indicative guidance has been given within the guidelines. What you also must recall and ensure that you adopt in your practice is that these guidelines are in their first version, and all these lists of medicines are indicative in nature and they're not exhaustive in nature. They are actually growing and evolving. As the guidelines are a living document and they're a dynamic document and they're growing organically, what is important for you to understand is list A has already been amended once. Because of representations coming from the Psychiatrist Society, what has happened is that list A has now 3 extra drugs or 3 additional drugs added to the list for the purpose of prescription over telemedicine consult. Quickly moving on to this matrix which has been provided within the guidelines. If you see, all the lists of medicines have been mapped against the mode of consultation that you must indulge in for the purposes of falling back on these lists. If you see, list O says that any mode of consultation, any nature of consultation can be used for referring to list A. However, list A requires it has to be a video consultation, and it could be both for first consultation and follow-up consultation. If you see, list B has a further rider and it states that it's restricted only for follow-up consultation. This matrix is provided within the guidelines, so you can familiarize yourself with these guidelines. And if you see, these little footnotes actually give you the context in which you can refer or probably use your professional judgment and then add to it or probably be inspired from it to see which list you can fall back on. However, what you have to bear in mind at all times is the list, the prohibited list. You cannot refer or prescribe any drug which is under Schedule X of the Drugs and Cosmetic Rules or the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, or is part of the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act. You cannot fall back on these acts or any drugs identified under Schedule X of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act and Rules and NDPS. You cannot do it in any mode of consultation or in any nature of consultation. Please be very mindful of that fact. It will lead to professional conduct under these guidelines. Also, if you see, these footnotes give you indication as to how you can refer to what list can actually capture a medicine that you wish to prescribe to your patient over a telemedicine consult. Coming to the last leg of my discussion is the duties and responsibilities of you as an RMP. Like I have already mentioned, since these guidelines are not substituting the laws which already apply to you, what you have to remember as that any additional rider which you see or any additional condition which has been laid down within these guidelines have to be complied with in addition to the Indian Medical Council Act, the rules and the regulations thereunder. Also important for you to notice that since it involves IT systems and there is involvement of sensitive personal information flowing, you are expected to comply with the data privacy and protection framework. While as a doctor, you might think that it is something that will be very difficult for you to do. Remember, be mindful of the fact that ignorance of law is not an excuse in a court of law. So you have to make attempts. Try to reach out to sources or go back, look at the MCI website, the Board of Governors website or the Ministry of Health and Family Affairs website to see all the laws which are interplaying with your practice of telemedicine in your day-to-day consult. You as an RMP are also expected to perform a basic due diligence as to see if the platform that you want to participate in or onboard is acting or is in basic compliance with the TPG of these guidelines or not. It is equally important for you to remember that you are supposed to ensure that you preserve the patient's records, including logs of conversations and correspondence that has originated from your end, gone to the patient's end, and vice versa. All of this has to be maintained in a safe and secure environment. You cannot freely share them. If you do that, that will also lead to professional misconduct under these guidelines, and it could also lead to other civil and criminal liabilities under other laws. Please be mindful of that very fact. And please note that since these guidelines have not actually made or given any timeline for which you are supposed to ensure those records, what will apply to you or what will continue to apply to you is under the Indian Medical Council Act and the regulations for inpatients and outpatients, you will continue to preserve the records for a period of 3 years, and for medical legal cases, you will be continue to preserve such records for a period of 10 years. I would like to conclude my bit by explaining to you that since or similar to how the psychiatrists have come together and made a representation to the Board of Governors, you can also list the essential and most basic drugs required in your clinical specialty, collate that list, send it back to us at the Telemedicine Society of India, or make individual or formal representations to the Board of Governors or the Ministry of Health for amendments to the lists. Please be mindful of the fact that while have come to enable your practice of telemedicine, they are in no way or manner substituting the laws that were already applicable to you. So please practice safely. That's my bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bhagmishika, for giving us such a good overview of the legal aspects of the guidelines. You said about the prescription, you said about the payments, the consent process, and how to preserve the documents over 3 years for ordinary circumstances, 10 years for medical legal situations. I think the two big drivers are going to be the payment and the prescription, which have been included in these guidelines. So we'll move on now. And I would also request the participants to key in their questions as the speaker speaks, so that we can look at those questions, and when we have a question answer session, we start answering your questions. Let me share my screen now. I'm the next speaker to give you an overview about the telemedicine guidelines plus the clinical aspects of these guidelines and how to use it in urology practice. So before I start, I just want to tell you that this is supported by CIPLA, but I have no conflict of interest in this presentation. And over the next 20 to 25 minutes of maximum, I'm going to give you a scope of an evolution of telemedicine, types of telemedicine for practice, e-consent and e-prescription, which Bhagmishika has spoken to you. I'll just enlarge on that, and how we apply it to urology practice. So what is telemedicine? Let's define it. Telemedicine is the delivery of healthcare anywhere in the world by combining communication technology with medical expertise. It was in the year 2001 that the Indian Space Research Organization started the telemedicine project to reach out to remote areas like Andaman and Nicobar and Far East and so on, the Northeast. And this project still continues, some of these projects, and ISRO has been responsible for giving momentum to the whole telemedicine in India. We also need to ask this question: do we need telemedicine and telehealth? Is there a requirement for such a thing? With the advent of internet, there has been a lot of information which is available to the consumers, and their user experience of the consumers has changed by using some of the technologies which we have available readily. And many industries, many sectors have got disrupted, including banking, entertainment, travel, and so on. And so there has been a strong argument for many years to have something which is very patient-friendly. And telemedicine is patient-friendly because it saves patients travel time to clinics, saves costs of travel, there's no waiting time in the clinics, and taking time off work. As far as clinicians are concerned, it provides them with better clinical workflow, improves their practice efficiency, reduces practice overheads. And these times of social distancing and quarantine in the COVID-19 pandemic, Government of India wants you to practice telehealth. And the guidelines itself say that telemedicine is an enabler of healthcare access and affordability. As doctors, teleconsultations are nothing new. They're as old as the telephone. Soon after the invention of telephone in 1876 by Elizabeth Bell, this article appeared in Lancet on practice of by telephone. And it said that, that telephone will soon will help in reducing the, visits to the doctor's practice. So this was already anticipated far then. And the commonest advice on the phone has been, doctor, I have a headache, what do I do? If you look at the fascinating history of the evolution of telemedicine over the last 120 years, it was in 1906 that William E. Thowen transmitted ECG over telephone lines, and he went on to get the Nobel Prize in 1924. The revolution with radio came on, and then the television in 40s, and then arrived, telepsychiatry started happening in the late 50s. Teleradiology came, the heavy images were sent over telephone lines, and then the email came in 80s, and soon after, in 90s, the internet arrived, and everything changed. And the visual medical sciences like teledermatology, teleophthalmology, telepathology started taking off. And today, we have high-speed wireless broadband, 4G, 5G, fiber optics, everything is available. And we moved on from one-to-one care towards multi-point to multi-point, just like this event happening today. What has changed also over the years has been the actual term telemedicine is now called more telehealth, because telehealth includes both clinical and non-clinical types of telemedicine, which means that teleeducation, teleresearch, and also for administration. What has changed also is the rising incidence of lifestyle diseases like diabetes and hypertension. And we are moving from treatment to prevention, from illness to wellness. What is new also is the scheme of the health insurance scheme of Government of India called Ayushman Bharat, which hopes to cover almost 40% of the vulnerable population with secondary and tertiary care, with giving them some kind of insurance scheme. What has changed also is we're talking about wellness centers, electronic, primary health centers, and the newer technologies have come, the artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, with 5G being here, wearables like smartwatches, which many of you must be wearing, I'm sure, drones to deliver, medicines and vaccines, blood products to remote locations. And of course, our publication of our guidelines, national guidelines. In the past, it was felt that this technology, telemedicine, impairs a patient-doctor relationship because you can't see the patient, you can't touch the patient or examine the patient. But these arguments are slowly fading away, because with video teleconsults, you can actually see the patient, establish a virtual relationship. And the guidelines say video consultations are closest to in-person consult and real-time interaction, because it provides you with a better assessment of patient. You can see the patient's nutritional status, the eyes, swellings, ulcers, so many things. And then there are many peripheral devices which are available for assessment and monitoring as well. Due to the arrival of mobile technologies, or mobile health, or M-health, which has really changed everything. Today we have in India 400 million smartphones. I'm sure all urologists must be carrying a smartphone. And this is a great device because of it is very easy to use, and it has an extensive acceptance for us. And the WHO itself defines this as medical and public health practice supported by mobile devices such as mobile phones, patient monitoring devices, and other wireless devices. So with this advent of mobile phone, the implementation of telehealth solution is a lot simpler. Telemedicine also has been defined, as Bagmichka said, according to the timing of information transmitted. It can be in real time, like when you have a telephone call or a video teleconsultation, or it could be stored and forwarded asynchronous type, like email, SMS, WhatsApp. And for sharing images and audio files, also you can use the store and forward technique. You can use it for follow-up consult. You can use it for refill of medication and second opinions. But if you combine both asynchronous and synchronous type of telemedicine, then you get what are called hybrids, and these are available as software applications, or in brief called apps. And these apps are perhaps one-stop solution to the platform of telehealth consultation, because it can give you everything you require. A patient can log in, register, set up appointments, history is taken, documents, images, videos can be uploaded, consent is taken, then consultation is done, prescription is set, sent to a pharmacy, and the payment happens. There are many, many apps out there, and we'll talk about it in a minute again about these apps. The purpose of teleconsultation, as Bhagwani said, can be first consult or follow-up or emergency consultation. Consultations itself, teleconsultations can be for prevention, for diagnosis, for treatment, and for patient education. You can use them for any of these modalities. In patient management in urology, you can decide what is best suited under a given circumstance. You can decide what kind of teleconsult you want to give to a patient when he comes to you first time. You can just provide counseling, like precautions with alpha blockers or anticholinergics, the importance of removing DGS stent on time, importance of not eating out in transplant patients. So you could give some provide counseling if you wanted. You can give education to the patients, like drinking water to avoid stones, keeping urine alkaline for uric acid stone formers, and general precautions after TURP and value of testicular self-examination, and you can prescribe medication. The mobile health also can help with health interventions by sending, behavioral you can change the behavior of a patient by sending these text messages. You can monitor patients. You can, also send reminders for medications and appointments. The Government of India launched this app called Arogya Setu, which actually is providing information about the current pandemic, COVID pandemic, to the public. And this is an intervention. There are other interventions you can do as a urologist, like for stone recurrence, adherence to the fluid consumption for prevention, the Kegel's exercise for stress incontinence, again, the dangers of forgotten stent. These are interventions you can do. You can also monitor, CA prostates with PSAs, BPH patients on, treatment with alpha blockers, 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, TCC of bladder. You can also do some kind of a monitoring and follow-ups. As far as apps are concerned in urology, there are only 176 apps of the 300,000 apps which are available, medical apps which are available in the market today. So in urology, the potential of actually using this has been underutilized. And of the 176 apps, 20 are for prostate cancer. And 3 examples of these apps are for prostate self-assessment calculator, which is available in MedIndia, of which I am the editorial director. There is a risk calculator for prostate cancer, which is very popular, the Rotterdam one, and there is a sexual performance score on MedIndia. And these are simple calculators, which can and apps which you can use to do for patient assessment. The consent, as Bhagwani said, can be implied or explicit. If a patient walks into your clinic, you presume that the patient has come for help and advice, and that's an implied consent. The same way, if a patient initiates teleconsultation, then that is an implied consult. However, if there is a doctor or a caregiver who wants a consultation for the patient, another patient who may be at home or at the clinic, then this becomes explicit consent, where you require the patient to give the consent, and then the caregiver needs to tell you that this consent has been taken and shows you the consent before you proceed. And this is explicit consent. We need to record this consent as a document and preserve this. And who is a caregiver? Caregiver can be a family member or any person authorized by the patient to represent the patient. And this is the kind of consent you need to take. If in explicit consent, a patient can say, I agree for teleconsultation with a urologist so from Chennai. It can be done verbally or phone. It can be done through SMS, email, or video by saying this. And these are some examples of, explicit consent. If a mother is seeking teleconsult for a child, in that situation, you don't need to take a consent from the child as long as you have the proof of the mother. But what if you have an incapacitated patient who is unable to provide the consent? Then what do? If you don't know the RMP, you don't do it if you're not sure. Suggest for in-person consultation or physical consultation. If there's a prior relationship with the doctor or the caregiver, you may proceed with some caution. But let's say if you don't know the RMP or the caregiver and there is an absolute emergency, then you can give life-saving advice, life-saving measures advice, or first aid only. And you need to document these kind of consultations pretty well in your register that you've done this for later use. This is a consent form, or so-called refusal sample form, which captures the details of the patients, the purpose for consultation, the details of the doctor, including their contact number and the registration number. This is the purpose. It could be hematuria, symptom or condition it can be, It takes care of privacy issues and confidentiality issues. This is a sample form. A similar form you can use in your practice. And then the signature. As far as discretion and caution is concerned with prescriptions, of course, you need to use a lot of discretion and caution with this prescribing medication. Unless you have a diagnosis or provisional diagnosis, you should not prescribe medication. Otherwise, it will amount to professional misconduct. And there are a few lines related to this in the guidelines. And these are the prescription medication which Bhagvishika talked about. They are, over-the-counter drugs called List O, which includes paracetamol, cough syrups, vitamin supplements, iron supplements, and medication by Government of India from time to time in emergency situation. List A is the medications during the first video consultation. It includes ointments, eye drops, ear drops, follow-up consultation medications like for hypertension, diabetes, asthma, and of course this psychiatric medication. And as urologists, we need to send recommendation to the Board of Governors so that our medications also can be included. And then there is a list B, which are medications which are to be done if the patient has had in-person or a physical consultation with you and has come for a video consult. Then you can add some medicines, take away some medicines, and these are in list B. Prohibited medication, Schedule X, narcotics and psychotropics, never use it. This is a sample prescription form. Again, captures the details of the medical practitioner and the date of consultation, and then goes on to give the provisional diagnosis, complaints, and then the medication list. In capital letters, you need to write, and the strength, frequency, administration, followed by a signature. These can be sent to pharmacies, but you need to take consent of the patient, which pharmacy they want to send to. And if you suspect a minor, ask for age proof, don't prescribe. You can charge fees for telemedicine consultation, just like you do it for in-person consultation. It can be done before they consult, it can be done after they consult. A receipt needs to be given after this fees is charged. The health insurance companies will hopefully soon start reimbursing, and this will give momentum to the whole thing. There are some relative contraindications. In emergency situation, except for first aid or life-saving measures, you can't do anything more. Like somebody is bleeding, you can ask them to use a tourniquet. And then you need to decide from a situation to situation whether teleconsultation is appropriate or whether you want to give a physical consultation. You could have a 35-year-old with dysuria of short duration. You can give a teleconsult. But the same 35-year-old with dysuria and hematuria, you need to get him to see him physically, and you need to get him in person, do a physical consultation. You could have a 10-year-old whose foreskin does not retract back, and you can give a teleconsult to the mother. But the same 7-year-old whose foreskin is retracted back and with pain and swelling, obviously you need to call them in for physical consultation. You could have a 50-year-old diabetic who has frequent urination. You may be able to tell him what to do and what kind of investigations to do before they come, and you can do teleconsultation. But the same 50-year-old diabetic has right flank pain, dysuria, fever. You need to have them for physical consultation. So you need to use a discretion. What is you can do and what you can't do. There are always going to be some constraints. Patients find information about doctors, about their condition by doing search engines. They type into the search engine, get the answers. And sometimes, your mobile number can be available to the patients, and they can ring you at odd hours in the middle of the night. They can end up being on call for 24/7. So what you need to do is you need to give very explicit instructions when you're available. Google allows you to do that. You should have a different number for teleconsultations, always safer. Have a home page to provide information, and that is possible. What about this other problem of breach due to technology? This is likely to be one of our biggest challenges as we go forward. So as a doctor, you need to ensure that reasonable delivery of care is undertaken when you hire third-party services to give you this. And you can take some personal precautions. Like when you use a website, make sure that the website begins with HTTPS. S stands for security, not HTTP alone. Be very wary of public Wi-Fi's. There you can get hacking of your phone. Use a passcode on your mobile in case it is lost. So now I'll tell you about some, how patients are going to be driven to you for teleconsultations, and I'm going to capture a whole scenario from a subscriber who looks at the information to the whole surgery. This is a scenario which happens from time to time. Some of it happens. The whole may not have happened, but I'm just giving you something for you to imagine. But this is the way forward telemedicine is going to go as we move. So let's say in first stage, a subscriber has a computer interaction. He's sitting at home and reads on a health site about urinary blockage symptoms. And he realizes it coincides with some of his own urinary problems. So the website tells him to do a score or for urine. This is just like an international symptom score. So he starts keying in some answers. And the test score is 26, and the website suggests that he is strongly advised to see a local doctor or a specialist urologist. So he seeks an in-person consultation with a local doctor who does a rectal examination, finds a hard prostate, orders for a PSA, which is 10. This indicates possibility of prostate cancer, gland and prostate cancer. So the doctor seeks, a local doctor seeks teleconsultation with a specialist after taking an explicit consent of the patient. The remote specialist urologist confirms local doctor's anxiety about prostate cancer possibility, and he says the one way to rule it out would be a biopsy of the prostate gland. Then the remote urologist telementers an ultrasounded prostate biopsy after the consent of the patient is taken, and this is done. This is called a telementored procedure, very well recognized. Then a telepathology consultation is taken, again with the consent of the patient. Prostate gland, the slides are fixed by standard technique, and a diagnosis comes back of a high-grade adenocarcinoma, Gleason score 9. Urologist advises robotic radical prostatectomy after doing some more investigations. However, the patient has previous history of heart disease, hence a telecardiology consultation is necessary before surgery, and a telecardiology consultation is taken. A telestethoscope is used, ECG tracings are seen, tele-echo is done, shows ejection fraction of 65%, and patient is given fitness for surgery from remote location. So at this stage, the patient can either travel to the hospital, or if there is a local robotic facility available in the local hospital, then a tele-robotic radical prostatectomy can be done after taking consent of the patient and explaining the risks of the patient of the surgery.
So 1 minute left.
Yes, thank you. We're just coming to the conclusion. So you may wonder that is it possible to do this tele-robotic surgery or not? In 2001, many of you may have heard of the Lindbergh operation, when the world's first transatlantic cholecystectomy was performed successfully on a patient who was in France by a surgeon in New York manipulating the arms. Some of you robotic surgeons must be familiar already with this. So this is not new. And a radical tele-robotic prostatectomy is very much possible. However, current guidelines, this is not allowed. You can't do this tele-robotic surgeries. But this is a possibility. So these are some illustrative examples of how to use telemedicine in urology. I use it a lot for second opinions. Patients keep sending me these messages on WhatsApp, asking about somebody's having a stone, in the ureter, not urethra. See this mistyping here. And this is a daughter. The marriage is taking place in the family. Wants to shift the daughter by ambulance to Chennai. And then this is another patient who is in Andamans, who was being treated for UTI. Again has symptoms. Wants to know if she can repeat the medications. She's also sent the prescription. And another patient clarifying about some medications. Then I will use it quite a lot for teleeducation. We have a WhatsApp group, and all our postgraduates who are practicing now sometimes post cases to find out what they can do. This is a case of hematuria, a young man who has a small mass of the kidney. He wants to know what to do, preserve what he got the kidney. The reason also I brought these cases is, see, in the first, second, and fourth, WhatsApp message, I have removed the names of the patient and made the patient anonymous. And this is how you should go forward. But I've not done it on the third one, and this is wrong. And whenever you choose these kind of images or text to use, you must also seek permission of the patient, as you do in publications. Some do's and don'ts to follow for video consultations. If you're taking a tele-video consult for the first time, be very familiar with the system and the app. Don't try it for the first time. You should have adequate light, dark background, quiet room, dress appropriately. Even if it's in the middle of the night, comb your hair at least. Introduce yourself, be on time. Before starting, confirm if the patient can see you and hear you. Prescribe safe medication. Other do's and don'ts. If physical examination is required for diagnosis, ask them for in-person consultation. Very important. For first consult, always video consult. Take consent, preserve the documents of the consultation, inform patients that you are available for teleconsults. Don't go and solicit patients for teleconsultations by giving advertisements. And you should print the guidelines and refer to it when in doubt. So I'll conclude by saying that the term telemedicine literally means healing at a distance. It does not change our ethics of medical practice. The same six ethical principles apply, from beneficence to autonomy to justice and so on. It doesn't change anything. It only gives you another tool which is a great enabler for your practice. I also want to tell you that in 1981, India's first communication satellite was loaded on a bullock cart. And what I want to tell you is that we Indians can do some amazing thing with very little resources. And this is an example. And 33 years later, our mission to Mars costed us less than the cost of an auto rickshaw ride. So we can do amazing things with very little resources. So if you can create a model in India of affordable access to A1 telehealth, then not only your own citizens will benefit, but also other developing countries in Africa and our neighboring countries will greatly benefit, because they will follow our model. And if cost is such an important factor today in healthcare, if we can show that we can do one level of telehealth services, then I'm sure the rest of the world also will emulate our example. So with this, I'll end my presentation, and I thank Niti Aayog for giving us these very practical guidelines. Thank you. This is my email and my Twitter handle. If you wish to write any questions, feel free. So let me now can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
So at this stage, I want to call Dr. Subramaniam Swaminathan, who will speak to you about how to take care of the patients in OPD and for theater, and he's going to give you some kind of a triage. So over to you, Dr. Swaminathan. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you, Dr. Shroff. Unfortunately, my hair being what it is, short of wearing one of my daughter's hairband, I don't think I can get it any better than this. So I apologize for that part of it. But your point is very well taken. Hopefully, sanity will be back very soon, and more part of my face will be soon available for vision. All right, so let's talk about infection control. And I think in today's day and age, no online virtual meeting can be complete without talking about COVID, I guess. So, yeah, briefly, those are my disclosures. So, obviously, we are looking at options to reduce our outpatient activity. So, we want to reduce in-person visits, but we want to keep outpatient work happening, because there are a lot of patients who do need our care. Obviously, the government has said, please discontinue or postpone routine visits. That's fine. But a lot of the visits need not necessarily be routine or something which can be postponed. And even those who do come for routine visits, they may need to see us for certain medication adjustments and things like that, which may not be postponable. That's why we need to postpone and promote telemedicine, and that's been discussed in detail. And of course, we need to screen appointments on the phone for symptoms. We'll just talk about that. And we also need to have an SOP so that we can reduce the risk to both the patient, their family, and also to healthcare. So let's talk about, so the traditional way of doing things is no longer going to be possible. And we need to learn new tricks. And, we're not too old to learn new tricks. I mean, it's essential. If we don't adapt, we're going to become obsolete. So the first step is teletriage. So let's say a person comes in and calls for an appointment. Let's say the person asks for an appointment next week. There's no point in asking the person about symptoms today, because, this is a viral illness and they can develop symptoms later on. So it doesn't make sense triaging them very too far ahead of the consultation. The ideal situation is within 24 hours of the actual visit. So tomorrow's scheduled consult should be triaged today by phone to ask them if there is any issues. I would in fact go far and say ask if anybody in the household has any symptoms of fever or respiratory issues. If there is one person who has symptoms, you know all of them run the risk of developing infections, and we know domestic transmission is actually quite heavy. Second, not everybody who contracts COVID is symptomatic, but the problem is, irrespective of whether you have symptoms or not, the amount of virus being shed in the respiratory secretions is just the same. So it's really pretty bad whether you have symptoms or not, as long as you have infection. So I would say if anybody in the family has fever or symptoms, that would not be a ideal candidate for person to come in person for a consultation. I would also ask for history of recent travel to certain hotspots areas, or I would also include medical visits over here, because contact with healthcare itself is going to become a risk for developing COVID in the near future, because people who are frequent flyers are the ones who are more at risk for developing, for catching these kind of illnesses. And always confirm the patient's underlying diagnosis to make sure that you've got all the risk factors required. We'll go into that in the next slide. And also, always reassess, does this patient still need to come back? That question needs to be asked again and again, whether this can be done as a teleconsult. So risk stratification is absolutely key. The first thing is, what are the comorbidities which would increase the risk? So we know that based on the Chinese, the Italian experience, the elderly are especially vulnerable. Those with underlying chronic medical problems, which includes cancer, hypertension, diabetes, chronic lung, liver, kidney, or heart disease. In fact, even cancer survivors seem to be at higher risk than ordinary people, but those with active cancer have even higher risk. So if you have an elderly patient with prostate cancer, I think it's worth asking the question again, does this patient need to come in? And you need to make sure that there is a fast tracking available. So when you identify a high-risk patient, this is the kind of patient who should spend the minimum amount of time in healthcare. So their journey through the triaging, through the nursing desk, and to your consultation chamber and out should be as quick as possible. The faster, the better. You know, it's almost akin to the door to needle time that the cardiologists keep talking about for heart attack and all that. We need to have that kind of scoring systems to move the patient as quickly as possible. It's also important to ensure that your waiting room is not crowded as far as possible. So make sure your chairs are well spaced out. Many of us may have, multiple chairs put together. That's obviously not a good option. So if you have individual chairs, space them out. Or if you have rows of 3, put something on the middle chair to show that that chair should not be occupied, so that people will manually use only every alternate chair for them to sit. So something like that is a good idea to make sure that there is social distancing that is followed in your waiting area as well. Always optimize the system to ensure that you reduce the risk to everybody concerned. One option is to tie the patient's electronic health records to help risk assess. Because, time and time again, when I ask the patient, do you have any other medical issues? They say nothing. And then when I ask them, what all medicines do you take? Oh, I've been taking medicines for diabetes and hypertension for the last 20 years. Somehow that doesn't strike them as a medical problem. As far as they are concerned, it's under control and therefore not an issue. So very often the patient may say, no, I have no problems. Not because they want to lie, but because that's the way people are. So it's worthwhile looking at the health record to ensure that you've got the patient's risk stratification done, because many of the patients will be repeat visits and you may have data on them. And if these are high-risk patients, obviously you need to look at whether you can avoid it or fast-track the whole process. We also need to coordinate all the facilities in the hospital to make sure that the patient is out as quickly as possible. This is especially so when you have diagnostic services along with the consultation. Patients often have a urine analysis being done, some blood work being taken, a prothrombin time or something, some kind of blood work being taken, or they may have an ECG being done, or they may have to go to other areas of the hospital, like maybe a cardiologist. Especially if we're dealing with an older person, they may need to see the diabetologist or the cardiologist. The idea is for you to have a system which can tie it all together so that the patient can be moved as quickly as possible and is out of the hospital in as little time as possible. And it's also important to ensure that you minimize contact with healthcare workers. For 2 reasons. It works both ways. One, because healthcare workers are obviously more vulnerable and you don't want them spending time with healthcare workers. And second, healthcare workers could be carrying the virus in the later part, and they could inadvertently be sending out the virus to the most vulnerable patients who may be coming to see us, and therefore it makes sense for both sets, from the safety of both parties involved, to minimize the contact. So see how you can skeletonize your staff while not compromising the quality of service delivered. How else can we risk reduce? If they're coming in, you need to re-triage them again at entry by a questionnaire and by temperature check, those infrared guns, and it should be done both for the patient and for the attender. If it's an adult patient who doesn't need an attender, it's better that they don't come with an attender, just the patient alone. If the person is a little debilitated and needs help, then the attender also needs to be triaged. Please ensure that you don't have any what we call aerosol generating procedures available on site. Aerosol generating procedures are things which will convert this droplet infection into an airborne infection, which is extremely dangerous. Simple example of that is a nebulization service. So if the patient needs to have nebulization, then they need to do it in a separate area which has a separate air handling system. And people there need to wear an N95 mask, otherwise the plain mask is enough. And again, nasopharyngeal swab taking cannot be done in your outpatient, has to be done in a separate area because that is also an aerosol generating procedure. And at the time of triage itself, it is worthwhile to educate the patient on the appropriate use of mask and also the right way to cough, which is what we call cough etiquette, which is basically cough into your shoulder, not your elbow, not your wrist, and certainly not your hands. So, and of course, using hand sanitizers should also be encouraged as much as possible. These things are very, very important as risk reducers. So, this is a flowchart that we have put out for as clinics or standalone areas where you may have patients coming in for physical contact of healthcare. So you need to have separate areas for triaging, screening, temperature recording, holding area, your doctor's chambers, and then what happens to visitors. Most people only need triple layer masks. You don't need an N95 for most of these procedures unless, as I said, you're doing an aerosol generating procedure. And the risk is actually not that high provided your triaging is appropriate. Remember, a coughing patient is very, very dangerous. And two, when you have masks, make sure that the coughing patient wears a mask because it's more important for the patient to wear a mask than you do. If you wear an N95 and the patient is coughing, you're at high risk. If you're not wearing a mask and the patient is coughing but has a simple 3-layer mask, then it's moderate risk. So as you can imagine, it is far more important for the coughing patient to wear a mask than even you're wearing a mask. So some general rules, obviously N95 is only for aerosol generating procedures, avoid nebulizers and aerosol generating procedures, fast track those with medical symptoms and have a separate area for them to be seen, insist on social distancing and 1 meter separation, especially in the waiting area. Hand hygiene especially has to be re-emphasized to all staff and patients, and the staff should be continuously doing this. Posters on steps of hand hygiene and cough etiquette are a good idea, and the cleaning protocol should be appropriate, and thrice daily cleaning of the area with hypochlorite is a good idea. People keep often asking me this, what about air conditioning? So I'm just putting out this extra slide. Air conditioning is obviously key because, India is a hot country, and without an air conditioning, it's going to be insane. As long as it's not an aerosol generating area, this is only a droplet situation, and therefore a shared air conditioning system for the whole area is absolutely fine. There is no risk. But if there is any aerosol generating area like nasopharyngeal swab, intubation, or nebulization, then you need a negative pressure room with a separate air handling measures or natural ventilation. And all people involved in that activity have to wear appropriate PPE, including an N95 mask. So this is absolutely key. So please make sure that you don't convert the droplet infection to an aerosol generating infection. And we have more such guidelines on our website at citsindia.org. And I think going forward, probably the best thing to do is wear masks as much as possible. Please take care of yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Subramaniam, for giving us this short overview of the precautions to take. I'm sure there'll be some questions coming up on this topic, as we move forward. Can I request, before I ask Mayank to speak to us on how to set up a practice of telemedicine, I know, starting from A to Z. Can I request, participants? I think we've crossed 350. We may be nearing 400 now. I wanted to ask you to type in your questions into your boxes so that we can answer those questions. Maybe consent, maybe prescription, maybe how long to keep the records, whether there's some COVID virus in the urine, kidney, whatever questions you have. So please start keying in those questions so that we can ask the panel and we can be prepared in advance to fire those questions. Some of you have done that already and we are waiting for more questions. So next I'm going to ask Mayank to give us those practical guidelines on how to set up a telehealth consultation for a urologist and how to put up a payment gateway, what are the precautions you need to take. Give us a very practical advice that somebody like, who has never done telehealth and wants to get started. He has a smartphone, has a good camera, and he's ready to go. So please tell us what you'll do, Mayank.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. So,
Thank you, Mayank.
if you guys are in a hurry, then just listen. Make sure that you follow the directions that Bhavishika and Dr. Shroff has given you, and use WhatsApp. You're good. For the longer version, you can stay on. So I'm going to talk about the telemedicine practice guidelines, a practical perspective with respect to implementation, and I'm going to talk about how we leverage technology that's available today for our practice. And we'll talk briefly about staying compliant with the telemedicine practice guideline. Most important things that I take away when I read the telemedicine practice guidelines are: first, anonymity is not permitted. You need to know who the patient is and the patient needs to know who you are. The mode of communication has to be decided by you as the doctor and not by the patient, although of course you can go back and forth and agree on the right mode. Consent has to be recorded explicitly. Then we'll come to patient evaluation and patient payment collection. The first three have mostly been covered, so I'm going to start with the next set. As again has been mentioned by Bhagmashika, you must uphold the same professional and ethical norms and standards as an in-person consultation. If you're doing that, you're 80% of the way there. For the rest, you just need to maintain all records. You need to ensure that diagnosis or provisional diagnosis is mandatorily written on the prescription. There is one difference in a consultation offline versus online, and that is that if you cannot carry on with a consultation because you require the results of some tests, the consultation does not end with you saying, get these tests done and come back to me. The consultation is paused. When the patient comes back with the results, then the consultation is unpaused, and after you provided the advice, then the consultation completes. So this is one difference for quite a few doctors with respect to an offline practice. Other couple of things. One, a scan or a photograph of a physical prescription is permitted. So if anybody tells you you only need to do e-prescriptions, that's not right. The telemedicine practice guidelines allow you to use photographs of physical prescriptions, your regular prescriptions. If, however, you insist on e-prescriptions, then you mandatorily require a digital signature. For payment collection, the good news is that you can charge whatever you want, but you should not charge more than a physical consultation. And if you charge any money, sending an invoice to the patient is mandatory. How we do this? We'll do this by leveraging technology. And as I said in the beginning, WhatsApp works. If you're an organized person, if you understand the processes that you go through, and we'll go through them in this presentation, then you just need to set up a few things, and you do not need any other software or anything else to conduct your telemedicine practice. This is a great way to get started. Create your message templates, which identify you, your credentials, and have your pricing details. Create a message template where you request for patient details, some, their demographic details, what problems they're having, maybe age proof or ID proof if you feel that that's warranted, and have a consent request template for audio, video, as well as chat. Because you don't just need consent for telemedicine, you need to ensure that there is consent for the mode of telemedicine also. The bad part, you cannot delete any message ever from WhatsApp. Please make sure you have backups. Don't forget to send invoices. Also, with invoices, you can take a photograph and send it across, no problem. Or you could use some software, whatever works for you. And WhatsApp allows you to accept payments through UPI. So a lot of people can just use WhatsApp and be able to manage their entire telemedicine practice. Of course, if you have more than, say, 10 odd patients a day, then this might get a little cumbersome. So instead of backing everything on your phone, you may want to store all your records in a Google Drive or your computer or iCloud, depending on what phone you have. You will need to maintain a log of every patient. It does not have to be a digital log. If you've got somebody who's helping you out, that guy writes down everything in a physical register, completely all right. If you manage all your appointments through your calendar application, absolutely no problem. Just make sure you log everything in detail on it, and you don't delete any older appointments, right? For doctors who'd like to give the option of other modes of payment apart from UPI, you'll have to integrate a payment gateway for collecting payments. That way you'll be able to accept credit, debit cards, wallets, bank transfers, what have you. You will need to store hard copies of all prescriptions and invoices if they are not e-prescriptions and e-invoices. If you're taking a photo and scanning and sending them, please store a hard copy. And make sure that the standard operating procedure as laid out in the TPG is followed for every patient without payer. You could either do all of this yourself, or you could use a software that automates this for you. This is up to you. It depends on your volumes. It depends on how organized you are, whatever works for you. Let's come to payment gateways, right? This is very practical advice. Use a modern payment gateway. The best payment gateways are the one where the payment comes to you more than 70% of the time, which means that if somebody is trying to pay you, 7 times out of 10, you will get the payment, right? InstaMojo and Razorpay are the leading payment gateways. They are the easiest to set up. They don't have a lot of red tape involved. It doesn't take a huge amount of time to start collecting payments on them. You only need your address proof, your ID proof, and a bank account statement. So address proof typically will be your Aadhaar. Your ID proof typically will be your PAN. You just need to, 30 minutes of work and you're sorted. Once you have an account, go to the dashboard. There'll be a section called Create a Payment Link. Go there, put in your normal consultation fee. It'll give you a link, and you can send this link to any patient of yours. And once they click on that link, they will be able to make a payment to you with a credit card, debit card, bank transfer, wallet, whatever it may be. Of course, all these payment gateways charge a small amount of money. It's between 2 and 3% or a little more. But they really set your practice free, and it looks very professional when you send them these kind of tools to collect payments. Right. Another interesting thing is have details of all your transactions. So that's a financial log which is maintained. On top of that, they have pre-invoicing software. So if you don't want to do the invoicing yourself, you can let these, every time a payment is made, invoice will be ready for you to download and send it to the patient. So you don't have to worry about invoicing and this and that. Coming to digital signatures. These are again required only if you want to give e-prescriptions. The key reason why digital signatures are required is because of two properties of a digital signature. One is authentication, and the second is non-repudiation. Authentication means you are who you say you are. So the signer is the person he says he is. And non-repudiation means that the person who has signed this document cannot go back and say, oh, I signed a different document. This is not the document I signed. And if you see here, this as well as this. So these are not what digital signatures look like, because once you've signed with a pen or a stylus on a tablet, or you've taken a photograph of some signature, and if you send it to a patient, the patient can then extract it digitally and put it on any document, and he can say it was you. So you see how authentication and non-repudiation are both not satisfied in both these circumstances. What digital signatures are a very technical, digital signatures are a technical term. They ensure that whatever data is written on the document, there is a signature which is unique to that document, and the signature that is made is unique to the person who has signed. So every time you sign, the signature will be unique for every document. This is what typically a digital signature looks like on a software like Adobe. If you go slightly more crude, this string of alphabets, this string of characters, is what a digital signature looks like in real life, right? Without all the paraphernalia of software. So if you just have a Word document and you want to digitally sign it, you take it through the digital signing software, you will get something like this string of characters, which you just then send along with your Word doc, and your document is signed. Coming to the practical aspects of digital signatures, these are highly regulated. The Controller of Certifying Authorities of the Government of India has authorized 15 certifying authorities. These include eMudra, Encode, CIFI, etc., who can issue digital signatures. Nobody apart from these 15 certifying authorities can issue digital signatures for which have any validity in the context of the Government of India, right? There are three types of digital signatures: class 1, class 2, class 3. All those who are familiar with digital signatures will know of class 2 and class 3 digital signatures more, because those are the ones that are available on blue dongles, right? Or purple dongles, which you put in your computer when some filing has to take place or some financial transaction has to take place, etc. As per the norms of the government, for e-prescriptions, a class 1 certificate is enough. A class 1 certificate does not require that purple or blue dongle. It is just a digital file which you will keep on your computer, and you will use software to sign whatever prescriptions you want. Alternatively, you can use Aadhaar-based digital signatures. So eMudra has a very nice application called eSign, which uses Aadhaar-based digital signatures for any document. And at this time, they're running a promotion where they're permitting unlimited number of digital signatures for individual users for 500 rupees per annum. A class 1 digital signature typically is cheaper because it costs something like 300 to 400 rupees for 1 year, for unlimited signatures, of course. But the Aadhaar-based signature might be easier for you to implement for your practice if you choose to. As I said, digital signatures are mandatory for e-prescriptions, but e-prescriptions are not mandatory for telemedicine. If this looks too onerous for you, please use scanned copies and photographs of physical signed prescriptions. These are permitted. Just keep a record of these hard copies. Keep hard copies with you. Now let's move on to setting up your virtual practice. Take a phone. Enable backups of your phone on the Google Drive or the iCloud Drive, depending on whatever you have, an Android or an iPhone. Ensure that WhatsApp and your image gallery are being backed up. Then either enable payments on WhatsApp, so you'll get UPI payments through WhatsApp, or set up the payment gateway. Create your message templates. I've got some of these message templates here, and but these are illustrative, and please be this is not legal advice, so please consult a lawyer before you use them. So have a self-identification template where you talk about who you are, your registration number, your qualification, your experience, your contact details, and the charge per consultation. This not only satisfies the legal requirement, it also instills confidence in a patient who's consulting you for the first time. Similarly, have a patient identification template, where you ask the patient's name, age, address, email, phone number, and proof of age if needed, or ID proof if needed. A template for agreeing on the mode of consultation. So you can say, this is the first consultation, I want to do video. and then you put in a disclaimer where saying these consultations are not perfect, could have limitations, and then you say that in case you feel you have your condition warrants a higher level of care, you can end the consultation and advise for an in-person consultation. So this typically is a good template for agreeing on the mode of consultation. And then consent request and payment can go together, where you send the link. So here I've used InstaMojo. You could use whatever you'd like. And please use the link above to make the payment. By paying, you explicitly agree to provide consent for consultation between yourself and me. In case of minor, it should be between your ward and me. Once the payment has been made, kindly share the confirmation over WhatsApp. So once the payment is made, InstaMojo will send a confirmation. That confirmation, once it's sent over to you on WhatsApp, you can confirm on the dashboard of InstaMojo or Razorpay that the consultation has been completed. And you can be confident that in a few days, the money will reach your account. One best practice that I would like to recommend, as Dr. Shroff also said, I would recommend have a phone exclusively earmarked for consultations. If you do that, you are not likely to mix up your professional data with your personal data, because WhatsApp has a very nice habit of polluting all your image gallery, etc. So you know that phone should not be, you cannot delete anything of that phone, etc. You can have a separate Gmail account which backs up all the data. So you have 15 GB of backup space free and available only for your practice for that. So I would highly recommend having if you're following this process, have a separate phone for your telemedicine practice. This is the process of telemedicine, the standard operating procedure, as I promised I'll take you guys through. So first there'll be an appointment request. Once an appointment request comes in, you can set up broad parameters. Okay, so this is on the phone that, okay, this is when the consult will happen, this is the mode of consult, etc. You've talked. Once you keep the phone down, send your identification message and request for patient identification. It makes sure that everything is documented properly, and it allows you, it ensures that you're following the TPG process. Agree on the mode of consultation, as we discussed previously. Send the consent request and payment link. And then you can begin the WhatsApp consultation over video voice chat. Now, I'm using WhatsApp because everyone has WhatsApp, but please feel free to use Skype, Zoom, Jitsi, Google Meet, whatever, what have you. It doesn't matter. You can use your regular phone call, SMS, it doesn't matter. As long as you think that mode of consultation is appropriate for the patient. After the consultation is completed, create a physical prescription detailing everything that happened on the call. Now, key thing to remember here, you need to record that you took consent, and you need to record the provisional or the diagnosis of the patient on the prescription, without which it will be considered malpractice. Sign the prescription with your regular signatures with your hand, scan it or take a photo. Now for this, you can use apps like, so one that I really like is Microsoft Office Lens, because it doesn't have any watermarks or anything, and it's very nice, crisp images you get. Or you can use Cam Scanner, and then send it over on WhatsApp. Then you can download the invoice from the payment gateway, or you can create a physical invoice. Again, do the same thing, scan it through the lens, through Office Lens or Cam Scanner, and then send it over WhatsApp. Acknowledge the payment, and make sure you have a log of every conversation. Now, if you're using WhatsApp and you don't delete any message, you have a log of every conversation. You don't have to worry too much. But if you're not doing that, then keep a log. You could do it in Excel, you could do it in a regular register, you could do it on any software, it doesn't matter. And as long as you've used scanned copies of invoices or prescriptions, please keep hard copies with you. To end, these are the basic things that you need to keep in mind if you want to stay compliant with the telemedicine practice guidelines. Identify yourself and the patient. Take the patient's consent for the pricing and the mode of consultation. And during the consultation, record and save everything. Send out a prescription in the proper format and send out an invoice. If you're just doing this, you're doing well. You don't need to do anything else. Thank you. And yeah, that's all from me.
Thank you, Mayank, for a good overview on how to set up, a urologist to set up a practice and how to get started. And may I request the participants to start taking their questions. We already have quite a few. I just wanted some of you to just put in the chat box if you have heard all the presentations, all the 5 presentations properly. Was there any problems in your kind of your audio? Just give us a feedback as well in the chat window. And may I request all the presenters to keep their video on and unmute their mics so that I can see you and participants can see you. So I'm going to start off now. I don't see Dr. Ganapathy though. I think whether he's gone, I'm not sure. But anyway, let's start at the first question, which was asked by a gentleman called Sushil Karla or Karya? Yeah, Karla. I'm a senior urologist, and if I wish to specialize in telemedicine activity, how and where can I get trained properly? So, Bhagnishika, tell us about the TSI initiative. You're executive member of Telemedicine Society of India, and that's doing a lot of work for this aspect. So, tell him about that. Thank you.
So, the Telemedicine Society of India is conducting orientation courses, and
Little louder.
Okay, the Telemedicine Society of India is already conducting orientation courses for you to familiarize with the telemedicine practice guidelines. And like the webinar that you have recently, this particular webinar, if you have attended this and if you have followed everything that we have said, it is enough for you to practice, indulge in telemedicine practice immediately. However, please note that once these guidelines become notified, beginning from that date, within a period of 3 years, you will have to qualify a course which as and when becomes is released by the Board of Governors of the National Medical Commission or the Ministry, as the case may be. They will release a course which you will have to qualify, and once you qualify that course, you can practice telemedicine. In absence of the same, you can continue with your practice if you follow the guidelines.
Thank you, Bhagri. Just to, we're still getting people entering into the room. That's quite surprising. We are now in the question answer session, but just to recap the last 1.5 hours of what's been going on to some of you who may have just entered the room. This is Professor Ganapathy, father of telemedicine, who gave us an overview of how telemedicine has come so far. And then, Bhagmishika talked about the legal aspects of telemedicine. He talked about the consent process. He talked about the payments. He talked about how to preserve documents. He talked about the e-prescription, and she gave you the general guidelines on how to practice telemedicine safely, And after that, I spoke and gave you an overview on the clinical aspects, where you can apply telemedicine in your urology practice. And I also told you a little bit about telemedicine, how it has evolved over the years. And then Dr. Subramanian talked about the COVID-19 pandemic in these times, and how, as a urologist, you have to keep yourself secure, whether you are sitting in an OPD consulting or whether you're operating. And then Mayank gave us how to set up telemedicine practice, the practical aspects. If you have never done it, how to set up payment gateways, how to get your prescriptions, how to preserve your documents. So this is what has happened over the last 1.5 hours. These transcripts will be available. They'll be put, I think, on YouTube. So just be in touch with us and we'll tell you if you have missed some of this. So let's go to the next question. And let me get the window out. And there is Dr. Anil Alhans, and he has asked quite a few questions. And let's take one question at a time. Why is such a distinction between first time and follow-up consultation? Bhagmishika.
There is a distinction between first-time consult and follow-up consult, because if you see, they have been married to the concept of the list of medicines which you can fall back on to actually prescribe over a telemedicine consult. It becomes important from the point of view that where you as a RMP are not satisfied, or if you think that there is not adequate information flowing, so you can actually ask the patient to go undergo further investigation or procedures, come back to you with more information. It is to safeguard your interest as an RMP, to be able to ensure that you can use your best professional judgment and only in the best interest of the patient, that this distinction has been made. So please be very cautious. Go back if you're not able to understand, read it, reread it, because there are flowcharts which actually explain it within the guidelines. So once you're familiar with it, please only then try to understand how you can actually prescribe. So please follow that distinction.
Dr. Shroff, can I add
Yes.
something as a clinician?
Yes, Dr. Ganapathy, I was going to ask you that in a minute.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
before
I look at it slightly differently. I think it's very, very important, and I'm telling you of practical experience, 45 years in neurosurgery, neurology. It's dangerous to continue to treat a patient as an old patient for more than 3-4 months maximum. Please remember that just because a person, I've been treating somebody with migraine for 20 years, does not prevent him from getting a brain tumor, and the headache which he now has could be due to a brain tumor superimposed on a patient with a headache, and so on and so on and so on. So it is good clinical practice, at least in 6 months, which is, I think, very good. I would definitely strongly advise any patient after 4 months, 5 months, to be treated as if it's a new patient. Go through the history again, go through the clinical examination again. Don't refill. Don't repeat the drugs, particularly for chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, convulsions, etc. We often forget. Yeah, okay. Wait, sorry, I forgot this is a urology meeting, right? Particularly BPH and things like that. So I think this is very, very important. You have to treat one. Two, nothing prevents a head injury patient from developing acute appendicitis. So I always think, oh, head injury sequelae, head injury sequelae, head injury sequelae. So I think it's clinically also important.
Professor Ganapathy, just very briefly, in one line, I wanted to ask you. You have been in telemedicine for such a long time. Do you think these guidelines are safe and practical for us or not?
I have gone through many other guidelines. I can talk with authority of at least 7 different countries. I think this is the most doctor-friendly, patient-friendly guideline I have ever seen. Malaysian Act of 1993, they were the first in the world to put a telehealth act. 5 years imprisonment to a doctor. Abu Dhabi Health Authority, it is a citizen of Abu Dhabi can be put in jail if he consults a doctor who is not registered with the Abu Dhabi Health Authority. So in that way, it is extremely doctor friendly.
Thank you, Dr. Ganapathy. Next question, again coming from Dr. Anil Hanahans. In which list do the common urology specific drugs like alpha blockers, anti-muscarinic agents, and statins, I think he said, for status of intravenous antibiotics? So you're talking about we don't have actually, Dr. Anil, any of these drugs listed at the moment, but in the list B, list A, there's a term called etc. in a bullet point, and etc. increases scope of what you want to write. The only thing is, with some of the alpha blockers, they do have some problems of giddiness and so on, and postural hypotension. So you need to be a little careful on the side effects, on whom you're prescribing, and whether they are already on any antihypertensives. So you need to be a little careful, and it is your discretion whether you want to write these drugs, on the patient through video consult or not. But our recommendation is to write to Government of India, and we get this list of medication also included, so there is no ambiguity in this list. And regarding intravenous antibiotics, the same thing applies. Again, you need to be careful. If it's a follow-up consult, you've seen them in physical, consultation, patient is very old, not able to come to the hospital, there's a good caregiver who can take care of the intravenous antibiotics, there are no side effects, then you may be able to give. So let's move again. Do we need to save each and every image of investigation seen during consultation, or just a log is enough? Lagmi, again, question for you.
So saving images that have been shared with you, if they pertain to, if they have been evaluated by you to be able to ascertain the health condition and then prescribe or provide any advice, you have to save them. It's not easy for you to document it in a log format. It will only be providing baseline references if you maintain a log of it. It is only for your safeguarding your own interests. You need to create an audit trail. You should be able to demonstrate that you did look at these images, and it's basis those representations made to you by the patient. Did you actually go ahead with your advice? So it is best that you keep those images available with you.
Can I butt in again, Shraf?
Very
I
short,
agree.
a
See,
brief answer.
now, for example, instead of storing 36 images plain and contrast on an MRI, I think it's more than enough if I choose 1 or 2 images which give me what is the diagnosis. That is all that is required.
Totally agree. Dr. Subramaniam, I want to ask you, does COVID appear in urine? They say no. It appears in tears, it appears in stool. So does it appear in, your urine? But as a urologist, it appears in kidneys as well, as we've seen in, some of the, autopsies which have been done. So tell us, are there things we don't know about this virus, new virus?
With any new thing, there's a lot of things we don't know. So obviously, it's still being actively assayed. The coronavirus does appear in the stool, probably to a lesser extent than the first SARS virus, much less so than the SARS virus. But yes, there is significant amount of coronavirus in the stool, and somebody actually showed that in Paris, at least, the amount of coronavirus in the sewage corresponded with the mortality in that week. So we know that population-based, stool shedding corresponds to how severe the disease is in the community. That's one. Second, as far as being in the tears and things like that, anything to do with the ear, nose, throat area, there's a lot of shedding of respiratory viruses. That's to be expected, and I wouldn't be surprised by that. Now, it's not something that is freely filterable in the glomerular system. And when you look at it in terms of those patients who died of severe viremia, it is going to be the hematological system in the blood spaces in the kidney. So the kidney getting seeded is not a big problem. But as far as presence in the urine, it's really not of any consequence. So far, at least, we haven't found detectable amount of RNA in the urine as far as we have seen.
So you think as urologists you are safe operating?
See, nobody is safe at this point of time. Everything with due precautions is okay. See, please understand that your risk is more due to the general anesthesia than the urological system per se. So if you're operating somebody under GA, that's going to be with intubation, ventilation. And intubation is a high-risk procedure. So that is the bigger risk, not the urological procedure per se.
Yeah. Luckily, we can do most of the things, under spinal. So that's great for us. And one more quick question to you. Has the curve flattened in India? And if it is not flattened, when is it likely to flatten?
Okay, the politically correct answer is we are doing a fantastic job and we are all going in a good direction. Does that keep everybody happy?
No, we want to know when do you think this is likely to even out, and when do you think the people can feel safe?
Not for the conceivable future. See, the problem is the only way we will get over this is by developing herd immunity, and for that we need the vaccine. There are only two ways of getting herd immunity. One is vaccine, the other is the disease itself. And viral droplet infections like this have a nasty way of circling back and coming back. And that's exactly what happened in Singapore. They thought they had it under control, it's come back again. They had it under control in China, it's come back again. So it's very difficult handling these kind of viruses. They are working really, really fast with the vaccine. If the vaccine comes out in 6 months, that will be the best news possible as far as really cutting off the head of the snake. But till then, I'm not too optimistic.
Thank you. Mayank, just quickly to you, is there any app for telemedicine? If yes, how safe in our patients? Data with that safe? This is from Karthikeyan. Did you hear that question, Mayank?
Yes.
Can we make recommendations? So, probably not, but yes. But tell us, what do you think?
So apps for telemedicine are dime a dozen. You can, a lot of them are there. When you evaluate such apps, even though the government of India does not have very strict policies with respect to that right now, but for your own practice, you must look at their data sharing policies. You must look at how trustworthy these applications are and what their prior track record has been.
Okay.
If you would like to be very, very safe and you want to make sure that no data gets transferred to these third parties, then one would recommend that you use as much of your own system as possible.
Thank you. Anil again asked, till the time urology specific drugs are added, how do we do a urology consult? So Anil, I can give you a quick answer to that. You can do second consults, you can do follow-up consults. In that, you can write some prescriptions, like if you've written some alpha blockers, you've seen a patient physically, and then there's a video consult subsequently within 6 months. Then you can obviously, change the medication and do things. So you still have opportunities to write certain things, but be safe. So as a urologist, you can also do a lot of counseling on, and you can do a lot of interventions, as I said, you can set up, your own kind of systems to send reminders for stent removals and so on. So many things you can do. It's just your imagination that restricts you. So Karthikeyan is asking, is there any, of course I've asked that question, sorry. Vivek Joshi, is there any model SOP? SOP, I think he's asking for standard operating procedure for telemedicine. Bagmishika, quickly, do we have a model yet in Telemedicine Society?
We do not have it yet. So in absence of that, you look at the TPG only. TPG has basic flow charts. And there are annexures there which are providing sufficient guidance for you to understand how TPG will actually govern your practice.
So TPG is Telemedicine Practice Guidelines, by the way. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Vivek Joshi, what is good app for urological practice? There is no good app as yet. There are different apps for different things. There is an app for BPS, there is an app for prostate cancer. There are no specific apps for urology as yet. So there is an opportunity for you, Vivek. Baldev Singh Alok, Dr. Baldev Singh Alok is from, he is asking question, cost of setting up good telemedicine facility at a hospital. Cost of setting up good telemedicine facility at a hospital. Mayank, can you do that? Or Dr. Ganapathy, you want to do that?
Well, it can vary from 1 lakh to 1 crore. It depends on what you want. It has to be customized, tailor-made. So it's impossible to give a ball figure unless we specify we do this for lots of
Dr.
people.
Ganapathy, why don't we tell him that we can scale it up slowly? He can start with the low cost and then as the volume grows, he can scale it up, right?
Exactly.
So Mayank, what did you say?
I would say start with individual doctors, see how much traction they are getting, and once that starts happening, then consider a customized solution.
Okay, good. Akshay Nabar, he asked, can you shed some light on future and applications of haptics in telemedicine in India as well as more developed countries? So this I can take on haptics. It's a good question, Akshay. Now, you're asking us. Now the haptics field itself has grown exponentially, and robotic surgery has started, incorporating some of the haptics applications. So once those applications are available in laparoscopy and in robotics, and if you have a good fiber optic, you should be able to do haptics for telemedicine of, kind of feeding the patient and touching the patient. So that is going to be around the corner. It's not going to take a long time. Another 10 years, haptics will be there. Nanan Chako, he's in Bangladesh, by the way. Nanan is asking, Mayank, business WhatsApp account, how does that work, cost, backup, etc.? So business account of WhatsApp, Mayank.
So for most purposes, if you have a regular practice where you're seeing approximately about 10 odd patients a day, you don't need to worry about a business account for WhatsApp.
Okay.
Even if you choose to have a business account for WhatsApp, there are some benefits you get, for example, a different kind of view, etc. Until you are a large business, you don't need to worry about too many of the API related other functionality. Even Facebook will not easily give it to you. So my recommendation at this time would be to stay with a regular WhatsApp account. That would work for you. Just keep a separate WhatsApp account from your personal account at this time.
So another question, now suddenly a lot of questions are coming up. Why teleconsult fees shouldn't be more than what you charge in person by, again, Dr. Alok? Why should not it be more than what you charge in person? Bhagmishika, any reason? Why you can't charge, let's say you're charging 500, why can't you charge 1,000?
Because if you think from the patient's angle, the patient is not getting the value for the money that they are paying. They want trust to be built, and of course, while there are provisions whereby at times you can say telemedicine is actually giving you more effective solutions than an in-person consult, there are certain things that you cannot actually do in a telemedicine consult. And because of those shortcomings, it is advised, it has been prescribed that it has to be appropriately charged So you can charge actually lower than what you charge in the brick and mortar world, but you cannot charge higher than that. I think Dr.
Okay.
Ganapathy also wants to add to that.
Dr. Ganapathy, very quickly, we have a lot of questions. Short
I know.
answers.
To start with, I wouldn't charge more. Full stop.
Yes. Oh, great. Good question. Good answer. Dr. Govindrajan asked, do we have a software that saves patient ID and investigations based on the call log and can be retrieved later as and when required or when patient calls back? Lots of softwares are available.
Yes,
Lots
yes.
of these things are already available. Mayank, you want to add very quickly anything?
So if you're using an iPhone, this is not possible.
Okay.
On Android, some softwares allow this, but I'm not sure the sort of customization that you're talking about is actually available at this time.
So I'm not talking necessarily of your using your smartphones. I'm talking about softwares which are available as EMR solutions on your
We have
desktop
it.
also.
Many of them are available in EMR, regular EMR. We have it in
Yes.
Apollo hospitals.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say. And some of the EMRs are also available on your smartphones, by the way. So Govindrajan, that is all possible. You just need to do a little bit more research. Dhawal Nayak, if we have done first consult physical, good, that's in-person consultation, then can we do follow-up consult with teleconsult? Of course you can do. That's the whole idea of follow-up consult, but within 6 months. If it crosses 6 months, it again becomes first consult. Remember that, Dhawal. Akshay Nabar, why are most telemedicine jobs for specialty doctors less paying? Why are most telemedicine jobs for specialty doctors less paying and more part-time as compared to in-person practice despite high numbers of patients needing this modality in our country? Akshay, we don't understand your question. Do you understand this question?
Well,
Anybody?
if that is the answer we have been trying to get for the last 20 years, if you could answer it, I think you would have solved the business model completely. We
Anil
don't
and
know.
has. Yes, exactly. I feel every consult should be considered first consult like Ganapathy. They're very good. Thanks, Anil. Pawan Kumar Jindal says some agencies are working, charging part of your consultation as service to establish telemedicine practice. Is it allowed? Yes, they will be charging a small fee for making it happen, a kind of facilitation fee. So, it cannot be exorbitant. So let's say if they're charging 500, they may charge you 50 rupees for that, and that is allowed. But if they're charging 250, then it's too much. So you need to just look at these things when you take something, when you apply for some of these solutions. Dr. Balasubramanian is asking, has anyone made attempts to get things like consent, counseling, etc. in vernacular? Very good question, Balasubramanian. Bhagvishika, we need to have it in vernacular, especially the consent. When are we going to do it?
It is essential, actually. Thanks for bringing up that question. It is important that when you're seeking consent, the patient is understanding what you are trying to explain to them. Unless and until you have actually explained it to the patient that how a telemedicine consult happens or what will be involved in that consult, it will not be sufficient even if you take their consent. So for that, it's essential that you communicate with them in a language that they can comprehend. And while there is a consent template that has already been created and we have uploaded on the website of Telemedicine Society, we are creating templates for vernacular languages. I think it's in the offing. You will have to wait for some time. Or if you know someone who can translate it, the ones we have, you can use them.
Sunil, I'll tell you what we do. We always have a language translator either at the remote end or at our end. That's a very important point. We have a lot of problems. Even Hindi people in Himachal Pradesh don't understand. They only talk Himachali. So we have somebody who translates Himachali into Hindi.
Yes, thank you. Dhawal Nayak, in continuation of the above question, can we stop? How can we stop a patient from prolonging consultation? Well, Dhawal, that is the prerogative of the patient. Even in in-person consultation, some patients take half an hour, some patients take 5 minutes. So that you cannot control really. It depends on the problem they are discussing with you. But you can give them a gentle kind of push if you wish, and use some techniques by saying that, look, can we do this again next time? I have another patient waiting, something like that. Be very courteous. Anil is asking, Anil is giving a compliment to Mayank. Good talk. He's asking, is it mandatory to be certified? I think he's talking about mandatory to be certified for digital signature.
For
Mayank.
digital signature, the only way to get a digital signature.
Sorry, I think he means that certified by the MCI, the certificate which is going to happen, you have to take it within 3 years. I think that's what Anil is asking. Yes, it will be mandatory to be certified to practice telehealth. And all the new graduates who are passing out will have to pass this examination before they get their license for practice. I hope I'm clear. Then there's another question from Dr. Mishra. Do they have any advantage? I'm not sure what you mean by advantage. Nayanan Chako again is asking, please load for me once if they are finished, so it will be patchy buffering. This is talking about the Howell again is asking, is there a limit of duration in minutes during consultation? There's no limit. Prashant Kumar Mishra, many applications like Practo and Docon in the market. He wants some opinion. Mayank.
There are a lot of applications, as I mentioned. You have to see what suits your style, but these are not, you don't necessarily have to use them. Just keep that in mind. Whatever you require help with, make sure the application serves your purpose, and then you pick it.
So, Mayank, how do we know that tomorrow Practo doesn't close shop? I hope it doesn't happen. And whatever you've done is all lost, That can happen?
You don't. Absolutely, something like that can happen. As a doctor, you need to plan for it because you're required to safeguard your records for a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 10 years. So that's definitely a problem. You must look at a lot of doctors don't consider, the way they use software is, they look at the user license agreement, I agree. This should not happen. Your professional career can be on the line. Please read through privacy policies, data usage policies very, very carefully and make sure that they are in compliance with the way you want them to be before you agree to use any of these softwares.
Mayank, I've been in this field for 25 years and I've seen many pharmacies, many consulting platforms which started in a big bang way have all disappeared. And my worry is the kind of, customer acquisition costs which these companies are, kind of incurring. If they close up shop, I won't be very surprised. So we need to impress on our doctors that whatever you do on any platform, always keep your own backup and be safe. Because you never know what will happen. Vikram Sridharan, he's from Trichy. He's one of my postgraduates. He's asking, what does a log mean? Do I have the entire video consult recorded? Bagmishika, please answer that question.
If you think you can retain all of the video consults, you can, but log means that you keep the essential elements of the video consult, that you begin with the timestamp, you begin that the type of consult it is, it's a first time consult or a follow-up consult. You capture everything, every discussion that has taken place, beginning from the point of you communicating it to them that it's a telemedicine consult, to the point of you taking consent from them. And if it's a minor, you have an accompanying adult, you put in those information, you ensure that it is type of consultation is mentioned, the context is mentioned, the mode of consult is mentioned. So all those 7 factors which have been given within the guidelines, including patient evaluation and patient management, all of that you can populate them in the logbook that you are creating, maintain all of that. If all those conditions have been highlighted within the guidelines, you can keep features pertaining to each one of them separately and distinctly within the logbook. Ensure you capture the timestamp and the mode also.
Thank you, Bagmi. So in the end, Vikram, what it means is that let's say there's a video consult and an audio consult, through the telephone. So that can be kept as a log. You don't have to actually keep those bytes because the files become very heavy. But you need to maintain a register, and in the register you need to write on this day, this time, this patient consulted me, and this is the advice I gave. This is for your own protection. Tomorrow, if somebody tells you that I did this and what happened, so this will work in the court of law. As far as record is concerned, then the transcripts of email, your WhatsApp, your prescriptions, your consent, all this needs to be kept as prescription and consent can be kept as a also as a hard copy, and thus email and others can be kept as a transcripts and should be saved on your hard drive. So this is how it should work. I hope we are clear on this. I just want to ask Mayank a question. WhatsApp says it's all encrypted and safe. Is it really safe? Because WhatsApp is going to be one of the commonest medium, I'm sure, initially for teleconsults to take place. So is it safe, Mayank?
It's safer than a lot of the other alternatives that are out there. So it's
Okay.
all right for the time being.
It's all right for the time being. And I also want to ask you, I mean, it is, WhatsApp only can preserve your records on your smartphone for 2 years, as far as I remember. So should you not be putting a WhatsApp also in a desktop, because there you can back it up more easily from time to time?
You can do that. So there is no real limit that WhatsApp has. The only limit is the memory on your phone.
No,
So
my 2 years old messages disappeared on some of the chats.
did the other party delete them?
No, but
Oh, that's
then I
surprising.
heard that WhatsApp actually now gives you that option only for 2 years or 3 years.
Oh, so maybe that's a
Anyway,
new
we can
development.
discuss that. Tell me one more thing. How do you set up how do you set up this payment gateway? How quickly can you set it up? How long will it take a doctor to set up a payment gateway
If he's
on
got
their
his
own?
if he's got a PAN card and Aadhaar card and his bank statement with him, it should not take more than 30 minutes.
Okay, great. So, we have more or less covered everything. We are at 8:15 at the moment. And I think, we have covered all the questions. We've had a great interaction. And, all the panelists have given good time. Thank you very much. And any last concluding remarks from Bagmi first?
So please be mindful of the fact, I will reiterate again, that since this has come only recently, a lot of chance to grow. It's still an organic document. So any feedback that you feel is essential to go back to the Board of Governors, please feel free to write to any one of us. We will take it, we'll do our best to take it to them. Second thing, please be mindful of the fact that they are not substituting the laws that already apply to you. So these are only additional qualifications that you actually have to again comply with. Third, the guidelines are actually pretty good, like Dr. Ganapathy also agrees. Please go back and read them. They will provide you a lot of handholding and guidance themselves. And do not fall back on the specifically restricted medicines or the list. Do not go beyond what is already prescribed, because that will not only bring you to be committing professional misconduct, it could also lead to civil and criminal liabilities. So be very careful and ensure that since you're practicing new, or probably you're practicing under the scope of these new guidelines, that you do not deviate too much away or actually at all from these guidelines.
Dr. Ganapathy, your last words.
I may be biased, but I think most of us are getting paranoid about this medico-legal problem. In the last 22 years, that to the best of my knowledge, there's not been a single instance, 1,300 million population, of anybody going to a consumer protection forum or a court to any telemedicine related problem. A. B. The United States, which is the most litigious society in the world, less than 2% of their cases are related to telemedicine. 3. So long as you do something in good faith, the context and your professional judgment, you think this was the right thing to do, I don't think anybody is going to take action against you for an inadvertent procedural lapse which was overlooked. So please, please, please forget about all this. Forget the technology, forget all this. Do whatever you would normally do when the patient is in front of you. Technology is an enabler to achieve an end and not by an end by itself. Use your judgment, your clinical wisdom all the time. That's it.
Thank you for your wisdom of knowledge, and I'm sure it will hold good, and it will encourage a lot of urologists. We share you guys look at neurons, we look at nephrons, and the urological area. So we're not very far apart. So thank you for those wise words. I think many urologists will get inspired to start telehealth practice. And Dr. Subramaniam Swaminathan, from you.
During times of crisis, we are forced to reinvent ourselves, and it's the survival of the fittest. So it's about time we started realizing that we are the creme de la creme. We are supposed to be the smartest people in the society. There's a reason why people think so. So let's make sure we prove that right and try to move with the times. Many of us did not grow up with a computer or internet, but we've all adapted to it fantastically. All of us know how to use a smartphone. So this is just one more step ahead from there. And it's a natural order of things. If you don't move, we're going to perish. And most importantly, please wash your hands.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Mayank.
As Dr. Ganapathy said, technology is just an enabler. Please do not get awed by it. Please do not think that, oh my God, this is something new I'll have to do, or I have to change the way I practice. or oh my God, so many softwares, how do I do this, how do I do that? You don't have to worry about any of that. The guidelines are very straightforward, and if you just do everything in good faith and continue to provide guidance to and consultation to patients the way you would do it offline, you will be fine. Thank you.
There are some more questions which are coming in, but I think we have run out of time. So, I think we should conclude because we're getting to 8:20. So, friends, thank you very much for, listening to us. It's been a good experience. We have almost 400 of you out there listening to this webinar. I think we've had a good 2.5 hours, just over 2.5 hours of 2.5 hours roughly, yes, of our webinar. Most of the questions have been answered. There'll always be some questions which won't be answered. I would suggest that you should become members of Telemedicine Society of India. The website is easy to find. Just type Telemedicine Society of India. You'll get the website. Become a member. You'll get the latest on telemedicine on the website about how to practice. You can put your questions. We are running also a course so that the doctors who are going to get certified by the Board of Governors in time to come, it'll be easy for them to take the certification to practice safe telehealth. So do take those certification exam. Dr. Ganapathy is raising his hand. Yes, Dr. Ganapathy, you want to say something before I conclude?
The TSI has decided that if we have more than 25 urologists, we will have a section of urology section of the TSI, and this gives enormous opportunity for the younger people, leadership and ability to choose what you want. And believe me, in my lifetime, there is going to be a Urological Telemedicine Society of India. Neurological Society of India has already agreed, and we are going to have neurologists and neurosurgeons who are going to become a full-fledged division, standalone division of TSI. So I am encouraging all of you. One of you will be the first president of the urological section of TSI.
Thank you. I think that's very encouraging. So I request my colleagues to join the society. It's not a new society. It's a 20-year-old society, well established. It's going to be in the forefront when it comes to giving guidelines and giving suggestions to the government of India. Some of you who use technology extensively will be very interested in using this. And that is the platform where we are going to be discussing about the hardware, the software, the apps which you can use. We'll be probably having quality checks as we go forward. There are going to be separate committees which are going to be formed for these kind of things. So this is the way forward. You need to change with time, otherwise you'll perish. So do it. So do consider becoming members of the society. It's a good society to become a member of. And we have some stalwarts in the society from all over the country. So I don't want to preach any more about membership. And in the end, I would say that at least I never thought that in my lifetime I'll see telehealth, neither did Dr. Ganapathy, I suspect, will see telehealth as a regulation, as a guideline, as a law in this country. Because if you really, we have been talking about this health for all, like it's become a cliche, very commonly used. And we've been talking about this for 30 years. The only way you can reach, this unreached population, so that the health can be really for everybody, will be through technology, will be through telemedicine. So be safe, practice it safely in your practice, think wisely, because a lot of power has been given at the end of the day to the registered medical practitioner, his discretion or her discretion, what to do, what not to do. If in doubt, don't do it. It's not compulsory. Thank you very much and good night.
Good night.